And thank you, Matt. The gospel this morning is the cleansing of the temple by Jesus, and we find it in the 8th chapter of Mark. But if I'm correct, I have it in the 2nd chapter of John, and that's the one I'm going to read. In the Lutheran lectionaries, it's that, not from Mark. So let me read that to you. That pertains to what I'm going to say this morning, so I'd better read it to you. The 2nd chapter of John. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove all of them out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling the doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "The temple has been under construction for 46 years, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered they had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. The gospel lesson you've just heard, it reminds me of what might be a raid by the police upon a drug lord's hideout. Unannounced, Jesus comes into the marketplace, the temple courtyard. No one has invited him. And what he sees in the courtyard appalls him. There are stalls, and in them are sheep and cattle, and in cages are doves. Sellers are urging pilgrims to buy these animals for sacrifices to give to God in the temple on the temple altar. And the pilgrims are being hawked by people. People are hawking them, the sellers. They say, "Look at this pretty lamb. It's the best one that is in this marketplace, and I'll give you a real good deal on it. No one can beat my price." And then Jesus sees the money changers, and he glares at them. These money changers, why are they there? Because the Roman coins were unclean. They couldn't be used for these offerings and sacrifices that the pilgrims were making. The offerings had to be made in shekels. And so a transaction had to be made between the money changers and the pilgrims who brought in Roman coins. And of course, when they made this transaction, a little bit had to be taken off of the Roman coins. If they were going to make a profit, then these money changers had to make just a little fraction of a cent off of each coin that they took from the pilgrims. In the courtyard, people are shouting, they're scurrying this way and that. And you had to watch out for pickpockets. Hold on to your coin bag very tightly and check twice if somebody jostled you. The courtyard was a busy, a noisy, really smelly place also with all those animals. There really was no time for silence. There was no moment for meditation. And Jesus wondered, and I'm sure other people wondered, is this really a place for worship? And so Jesus makes a whip, and he lashes out at the cattle and the sheep, drives them out of the courtyard, and he knocks over the tables of the money changers, and he scatters their coins upon the ground. And he shouts at them, "Get out of here. Get out of my Father's house. You have made my Father's house into a marketplace for thieves." money changers and the animal sellers run to the priests, and they tell them what Jesus has done. And the priests come out of the sanctuary, and they confront Jesus, and they demand, by what sign do you do these things? We would say, who gave you the right to come in here and upset what we're doing? Just who do you think you are? Just who do you think you are? And how does Jesus answer them? He doesn't say, I'm the Son of God. He doesn't say that God has given him the authority to come in here and run them out. His is really a very puzzling answer. He says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. What was Jesus talking about? Well, the priests took him literally. They think he's talking about this temple that they are in charge of here in Jerusalem, where they make sacrifices to God. And so they say to Jesus, are you going to build this temple again that we have taken 46 years to construct? That's impossible, Jesus. That's laughable. Who do you think you are? In the Gospel of John, and this is the reason I've switched from Mark to John, the cleansing of the temple comes at the beginning of the Gospel of John. In all of the other 3 Gospels, we don't hear of this cleansing until the very end of Jesus' ministry, when he comes into Jerusalem after his triumphal entry, and he starts toward the temple and toward the cross. It's at the end that we hear it in all the other Gospels. And so in this Gospel, Jesus is really a stranger to all these priests here at the temple. He comes out of nowhere unexpectedly, and he has no credentials as far as they can see. In the Gospel of John, before this cleansing by Jesus of the temple, Jesus has made and performed just one miracle. That's the miracle of changing the water into wine. And really, only his disciples and his mother and the people who were at the wedding party in Cana, only they had heard of this miracle and had seen it. Jesus had not yet preached the Sermon on the Mount. He had not started out preaching his parables and telling things in parables. He'd not healed the lame or the deaf or the blind in John's Gospel. And so there are no crowds that are following him. He has no groundswell of support. So for the priests, Jesus did not have the authority that later on his miracles and his teachings would give to him. To the priests, he was a complete stranger. So this was an audacious act that Jesus performs. A stranger coming into the temple unannounced, driving out the animals and the money changers, overturning their tables, dumping their coins on the ground. Who did Jesus think he was? Who gave him authority? And the answer that Jesus gave to the priests made no sense to them. For no one rebuilds something that took 46 years to construct in 3 days. What was Jesus talking about? We all know his body. They would put his body on a cross, finally. They would crucify him, and Joseph of Arimathea would take his body down from the cross, put it in his own tomb, and there Jesus would lie. And yet 3 days later, he would rise from the dead. Mary Magdalene would come to his tomb and see that the stone had been rolled away. At first, she would mistake the gardener and think that this was only the gardener and not understand that it was Jesus. But when Jesus speaks to Mary, Mary Magdalene understands and recognizes him. And then she knows who this is, that he who had been dead was now alive. Who gave Jesus the authority to kick out the money changers? His body. Risen, glorified, that authority. No When Jesus said, destroy this temple and in 3 days I will raise it up again, the priests didn't understand what he's talking about. Really did, not even his disciples. And so the priests, Jesus' cleansing of the temple made no sense. Who was he to come to the temple and tell them how to run their business? I know some of you out here are teachers. I know that Julie is. Who else is a teacher here? I thought there were others who taught. Okay. Some of you have retired. Okay. 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 Right. And you were right. My wife was a teacher for a couple of, I should remember that.
He's losing it, ladies and gentlemen.
See, and I'm not the only one that has.
Thank you, women. Just feel. I can't even find the word right now. Anytime you feel like it, just pile on. Okay. Okay. But if I were to come into one of your classes, unannounced, and just kind of, Julie, push you out of the way and take over your class for your special needs students, what would you do?
I'd wonder who you were.
You'd wonder who I was, and what?
And what your credentials were, yeah.
Okay, you wonder what my credentials were.
I have a master's degree in speech language pathology.
Right. And you might even, if I kept going and going and going like that, you'd probably go and get the principal and bring him in or her in, and probably I'd end up the police coming in, pulling me out of there, and I'd probably end up in jail. Or if someone would come in here unannounced and say, you people are doing the wrong thing. You should be in pews. You shouldn't be drinking coffee or Coke or cookies, or you shouldn't be giving the kids candy, and say, you're doing it all wrong. You're an abomination to God. I think you'd kind of say, who are you to tell us what to do? Who are you to tell us how to worship? Who are you to come in here and upset our tables? We thought of somehow doing that today, of coming in here and, I don't know, having a crew knock the tables over and so on. We didn't do that, but we could have. Who are you? Just who do you think you are? That's what the priests, and that's what most people were thinking about Jesus. If a stranger comes out of nowhere and upsets what you've been doing, our reaction is, who do you think it was? Who do you think you are? And so it was for Jesus. Who gave him the authority to tell the priests what to do? Who do you think you are? And that's a question that people have always had about Jesus, not only in his own time, but right up to our time. And people have answered, yes, you have the authority, and people have answered, no, you don't have the authority. And their answer is really, when you get right down to it, based on one thing, the resurrection. Did Jesus rise from the dead or not? Who do you think you are? That's a question that people ask of Jesus. And the proof, the evidence that he gives to them is a resurrection. And so that's the question before us today. How do we answer? Who do you think Jesus is? Who do you believe in today? Is this Jesus the Son of God? Did God raise him from the dead or not? And that's the answer all of us must give. And the question is, how do you answer? Are you a believer or are you not? And so the question is turned around. The question is not only asked of Jesus, who do you think you are? But the question is asked of us, who do you think you are? A believer or not? Who do you think you are? What's your answer?